Let's do a little more kinda, sorta, maybe philosophy as we continue to analyze Matt Walsh's attempted debunking of every pro-abortion argument. I definitely think the title of his video is a little bit of clickbait, but he does in fact offer 10 counter-arguments to claims that people make in support of pro-choice views. In the first video, I made too big of a deal of the fact that the claims he was arguing against aren't really arguments because in philosophy, in logic, arguments are things that have premises and conclusions. I beat that horse well after it was dead. I'm also going to try to be a little clearer, a little more concise, and make this video a little shorter. I'll try to tighten things up without compromising the ideas too much. Let's jump in.
4. The fetus is just a clump of cells.
Real quick jump in. It seems like this is just a premise to the argument. The claim is the fetus is just a clump of cells. At the very least, then there's a conclusion that because the fetus is just a clump of cells, abortions are permissible.
Answer. We're all clumps of cells. Some of us are far clumpier than the average infant. None of that is relevant. What's relevant is whether the fetus is a distinct and separate human entity, which he is.
Okay, so Matty's counter, pretty straightforward. So Matty's argument only consists of two claims. We are all clumps of cells, and the fetus is a distinct and separate human entity. I want to flesh the argument out a little bit because I think there's more to it that he's just not saying for the sake of time. Maybe something like distinct and separate human entities have a right to life. Zygotes, blastocysts, embryos, fetuses, every step of the way after conception to birth, you have a distinct and separate human entity, and each and every one of those collections of cells all along the way have a right to life, and that right to life justifies the prohibition of abortion. So, some things to think about with regard to this argument. One, if we're going to be talking about life from the moment of conception, technically we're talking about a few stages other than fetuses. We're talking about zygotes, blastocysts, embryos, as well as fetuses. Once that egg is fertilized and it's two cells, it's life, a distinct human entity, according to Matt. So I want to make sure that that's clear. The other thing that happens is when he introduces the argument, he says the argument is fetuses are just a clump of cells. But then when he talks about it, he says, we are all clumps of cells. The reason that's important is the argument probably hinges on the notion that there are meaningful properties that adult humans have, or babies have, that zygotes don't. The fertilized egg seems to be little more than just two cells. And that leads us to something else that Matt will have to address. There are lots and lots of differences between the clumpy sort of clump of cells that I am, or he is, and a zygote. Not just the complexity and clumpiness of those cells, but also some clumps of cells are capable of making long-winded, boring YouTube videos that attempt to offer philosophical or logical analysis of popular arguments regarding moral or social or political issues. Other clumps of cells have fetching beards and are capable of making well-produced, clear, concise videos that really drum up support for their positions, even if they cut some logical and or evidentiary corners. Those aren't the only differences between Matt and I and a zygote. We also have meaningful, caring relationships with our families. We're capable of reasoning, thinking, reflecting, having desires and acting on those desires. Those all seem to be meaningfully relevant differences that someone needs to account for. Is every distinctly human entity equally morally valuable? Are they all equally morally important in the same way? Do we have the same moral obligations to all of them? Are we required to give life-giving resources to all clumps of cells in order to keep them alive? On to argument 5.
5. The fetus is not a person, but a potential person.
Quick jump in. I don't think the complete argument is the fetus is not a person, just a potential person. It has to at least conclude with, therefore abortions are okay. More than likely there's a step in between, something like, we don't have the same obligations to a fetus as a potential person that we do a full-fledged person. The fetus as a potential person doesn't have the same rights as a full-fledged person. It's okay to deprive life-giving resources to the non-person or potential person.
Answer. No, he is again a distinct human entity. If this is not the definition of a person, then none of us are persons. Also, even if he is a potential person, it doesn't automatically follow that we should destroy him. Do you believe that all non-persons can be killed? What if I decapitated a bald eagle? How would you feel about that? You see, you're wrong that the unborn child isn't a person. By definition, he is. But even if you were right, you'd still be wrong. That's how wrong you are.
So only 4 claims here in Matt's response, and they're pretty straightforward. The fetus is a distinct human entity. If the definition of person is not distinct human entity, then none of us are persons. Even if the fetus isn't a full-fledged person, that doesn't mean we should destroy him. Then he ends it with a question, can all non-persons be killed? Some things to think about that pose some really important challenges to Matt's argument. We still need a definition of what a distinct human entity is and why distinct human entities deserve moral consideration. Are they intrinsically morally valuable? Why? What makes them valuable? Additionally, what happens if we have two distinct human entities whose interests conflict? If we're going to argue that the zygote's a distinct human entity worthy of moral consideration, then certainly the pregnant woman is as well. What if her interests? What obligations do we have to her? He may have just had another slip of the tongue, but he can't possibly be right if he really believes that if the definition of a person is not distinct human entity, then none of us are persons. If the definition of person is not distinct human entity, I can make it anything but distinct human entity. I could make it creatures who are wearing purple shirts, and then it might just be me. Now that's just a trivial example, but the sort of example people will offer, and have historically offered, is maybe it begins with, hey, there are creatures like us in the world, human beings that we know about, who have all sorts of characteristics that make us morally valuable and demand moral consideration. But they might not just have to do with our DNA. Maybe they have to do with the fact that we have thoughts, feelings, desires. We're capable of acting on those desires, to make choices as to whether or not to act on those desires. We have caring relationships and meaningful relationships with friends and family. There are lots and lots of definitions of person that go beyond distinct human entity. And it's clearly the case that there are lots of those definitions that would include lots of us. So this claim clearly falls. His bald eagle example seems compelling, but the problem is he says just because it's not a person doesn't mean we should kill it. I don't think anybody's ever advocated that we should kill all fetuses. No, we shouldn't, but there might be more circumstances where it's okay to kill non-persons. Heck, there are circumstances where it's okay to kill persons, for example in self-defense. And we can combine the two. What if you're the unlucky woman in Texas who had a hawk or an eagle, and let's say it was a bald eagle, I don't think it was, that dropped a snake on her, and then she ended up in a fight with the snake and the eagle because the eagle came down to get the snake back? What happens if she killed the eagle in that confrontation? She was unlucky enough to get into an eagle-snake fight, and then you're going to be mad at her for accidentally killing the eagle just because she's defending herself? Certainly there are non-persons who deserve moral consideration, and certainly there are non-persons that we want to protect. But also it seems pretty obvious that we have different moral obligations to non-persons than we have to person. The question here is, do the sorts of non-persons that potential persons like zygotes might be demand that we prohibit depriving them of a right to life? So I hope that was a little shorter and sweeter. Thank you all for the comments. I have tried to respond to all of them. I will ask that if you're going to come in and try to make a substantive claim or comment, at least stick around long enough to hear my response and answer it. I tried to make this video shorter. I want to do my best to never compromise the quality of the argument analysis for the sake of making something that people will find easier to watch in order to get more views. Because I would rather have 50 subscribers who are really into trying to figure out the truth and really dig deeply, even if they have to hear my stupid face ramble for a little bit stupid longer. So please, make comments, subscribe long enough to get a notification that I respond to it, and then unsubscribe. You can even tell me in the comment, look, I unsubscribed, ha. I'm going to keep trying. You keep watching and commenting. So far, I've had a lot of really interesting discussions. I hope these videos are inspiring people to think a little differently, if not better, and I love it when people show me that I'm wrong or demonstrate that I've made a mistake, because that's an opportunity for me to learn something. Thank you so much for the time. Bye.